The night I caught my CEO climbing through my bedroom window, I honestly thought I was about to die. She was halfway inside, one hand gripping the frame, her expensive coat covered in rain, and her usually perfect hair was completely soaked. I stared at her in disbelief and managed to whisper that there was nothing worth stealing in my apartment. She looked directly into my eyes, smiled in a way I had never seen before, and quietly said, "How about you?" I laughed because I thought she was joking. I had no idea that those 4 words were about to change both of our lives. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional stories about unexpected love, second chances, and people discovering the courage to open their hearts again, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness for more stories about second chances. You never know when a simple story might remind someone that their life can still change. My name is Daniel, and 6 months earlier, would have laughed if anyone told me that my cold, intimidating CEO, Victoria Hale, would ever climb through my bedroom window. At the company, Victoria was almost legendary. She was brilliant, wealthy, disciplined, and nearly impossible to read. Employees lowered their voices whenever she walked past. She could enter a conference room, say 3 sentences, and make an entire department rethink its strategy. I worked as a junior financial analyst, and although I respected her, I never imagined she even knew my name. Then my life fell apart. My father became seriously ill, and the medical bills swallowed almost everything I had saved. I started working late every night, taking extra assignments and cutting expenses wherever I could. I stopped going out with friends. I stopped thinking about relationships. My tiny apartment became less of a home and more of a place where I returned exhausted, ate whatever was cheapest, and slept for a few hours before starting again. I kept telling myself that temporary sacrifices were worth it if they helped my father get better. Victoria noticed. One evening, long after everyone had left the office, she found me asleep at my desk. I woke up embarrassed and tried to explain myself, but she simply placed a cup of coffee beside my laptop and told me to go home. The next morning, I discovered that one of my unnecessary weekend shifts had been reassigned. I later learned she had quietly adjusted my workload without telling anyone why. That was the first time I realized there might be a human being behind the icy expression. Weeks passed, and my father's condition improved slightly. But then something unexpected happened at work. A major investment project began collapsing because of financial irregularities. Someone inside the company was secretly moving money through shell accounts, and the evidence was pointing toward a department I worked with. Since I had access to several reports, I became an easy target. Suddenly, people who had once smiled at me stopped talking when I entered a room. Rumors spread that I had manipulated figures. One afternoon, I was called into Victoria's office and saw a folder lying open on her desk with my name written across it. My heart sank. I expected her to fire me. Instead, she looked at me for a long moment and asked whether I trusted her. I told her I didn't know. For the first time, something vulnerable crossed her face. She told me that she didn't completely trust the evidence either, and that someone was trying to make me the perfect scapegoat. She asked me to help her uncover the truth. For the next 2 weeks, we worked in secret. Late-night spreadsheets turned into whispered conversations. Business meetings became investigations. Slowly, I discovered that Victoria wasn't cold because she lacked feelings. She was cold because she had learned that showing feelings gave people something they could use against her. Years earlier, she had trusted someone completely. Her fiancé had betrayed her, stolen money from her family's company, and left her with debts and humiliation. Since then, she had built walls around herself so high that nobody could reach her. Except somehow, I had. The night everything changed, we finally discovered evidence that could expose the person responsible. But before we could present it to the board, Victoria received a threatening message. Someone knew we had found the truth. She told me to go home and lock my doors. I obeyed. Or at least I tried. Around midnight, heavy rain began hitting my windows. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the evidence on my laptop, when I heard a strange noise outside. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I saw a hand gripping my window frame. I nearly screamed. Victoria pulled herself upward, struggling against the rain. I rushed toward her and helped her inside. She landed awkwardly on the floor, soaked from head to toe, breathing hard. I stared at her and asked what on earth she was doing. She looked around my tiny apartment, then at my old furniture, my second-hand television, and the stack of unpaid medical bills on the table. I nervously joked that there was nothing here worth stealing. She smiled. "How about you?" My heart stopped. But before I could respond, her expression changed. She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. She told me that the person behind everything had followed her. Her car had been tampered with, her phone had been compromised, and she couldn't risk going back to her own home. My apartment was the only place nobody would expect her to be. Then she admitted something that shocked me even more. She hadn't come only because she was afraid. She had come because she couldn't imagine facing that night alone. Victoria sat on the floor beside my bed, and for the first time, she stopped being my CEO. She was simply a woman who was scared, exhausted, and tired of pretending she could handle everything by herself. I sat beside her. We talked until the rain became softer. She told me about her broken engagement, her fear of trusting anyone, and how lonely success could become when everyone around you wanted something. I told her about my father, my financial struggles, and the fear that I would lose the people I loved while spending my life trying to save them. Neither of us tried to fix the other. We simply listened. The next morning, we took the evidence to the board. The investigation exposed the real culprit, a senior executive who had been stealing millions through fraudulent contracts. My name was cleared, and Victoria's company survived its biggest crisis in years. But something between us had changed. She no longer spoke to me like an employee. I no longer looked at her as an untouchable CEO. A few months later, my father was finally recovering. I was promoted, but Victoria made sure the decision was handled transparently so nobody could accuse either of us of favoritism. One evening, she came to my apartment again. This time, she used the front door. I opened it and smiled, asking whether she had finally decided to stop climbing through windows. She laughed and said she had learned that some doors were worth knocking on. I stepped aside and invited her in. Years ago, both of us had believed that being strong meant never needing anyone. We were wrong. Sometimes strength is admitting that you are lonely. Sometimes courage is allowing someone to see the broken pieces you have hidden from everyone else. And sometimes love doesn't arrive with flowers, perfect timing, or grand promises. Sometimes it arrives soaking wet through a bedroom window and asks whether you are brave enough to let it stay. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes second chances are possible, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope tonight. And before the story ends, I want you to leave one special comment: I believe in second chances. Because maybe someone reading those words tonight has already given up on love, trust, or even themselves. Maybe they only need one reminder that their story isn't over. Daniel thought there was nothing in his apartment worth stealing. Victoria discovered that night that the most valuable thing neither of them had ever possessed was something money could never buy: the courage to open their hearts again. And sometimes, the person who unexpectedly climbs into your life isn't there to take something from you. They are there to remind you what you still have left to give.